In recent years, when I heard people talking about going back to play World of Warcraft Classic, I've often noticed that they refer to this as going home. We know that this is a statement that comes from that all too familiar nostalgia that those of us who've been playing WoW since the early days surely still experience. But if we're honest with ourselves, it's really not possible to recreate all of the same feelings that you had all those years ago playing the game. This is majorly because the naivety is gone. Everybody, including you, knows everything. There's no sense of discovery or wonder, and the sense of community that you would have had from years ago by collaborating with a fellow noob to stumble your way through a complicated quest is also a thing of the past. Yes, you can still group to kill elites, but again, everyone knows what they're doing, it's seamless, and barely any interaction is actually needed to go through with it. And that's if you're lucky enough to come across a real player who isn't a bot or some sort of a gold farmer. But we already know all of this. We know it cannot be recreated no matter how many times they launch a fresh server. So why does that sentiment of classic WoW feeling like home still stand? And why do people still talk about it with such warmth? Today, we're going to explore classic Azeroth and talk about why this particular instance of the game feels like home. And no, it's not just nostalgia for the way things were. Some experiences, like I said, cannot be recreated. And a part of the nostalgia goes with that too. Before we get started, hi, my name is Angelica, and yes, I know it's November, and yes, the bat is still here. I just felt like it needed a little bit more on-screen time. Is this going to be a problem? So, about recreating experiences. You cannot unlearn everything you know about the game and become a noob again. We have seen attempts to give classic WoW a new lease on life with things like Hardcore and Season of Discovery, and admittedly, both of those game modes were great in giving our beloved classic WoW a fresh feeling, to bring back some of that naivety, or a sense of danger and high stakes, especially in Hardcore. But why did people want those things specifically in Classic? Why not have a hardcore mode in current WoW, or instead of SOD, why not explore all of the new content that came with the latest expansions? It's not like they've stopped updating the game. With current WoW, you'll still have some of those inexperienced players, and you yourself are just discovering all of the new content for the first time, recreating that novelty feeling. But current WoW does not feel like home. And there's actually a really simple reason for that. There is just too much there. I think this really speaks to the state of most online games nowadays, but it's like an overstimulation simulator where, thanks to concepts that were introduced in mobile games, it's common to have online in-game stores where you can purchase the coolest cosmetics, flashy mounts, and all sorts of other bonuses to get instant gratification instead of earning something for yourself. Imagine somebody getting into current World of Warcraft for the first time right now, and the first thing they see when stumbling upon Goldshire is these like tall as heck, dinosaur looking 78 euro mounts? Which, I mean, 78 euros. Who paid for this? Are expansions even worth that? Let me see. No, so it's like 50 euro for the base edition and 70 euro for heroic edition. The mount is worth more than the actual expansion. And a heroic edition of that expansion also. What have we come to? And I don't know if anybody has seen that one Zaryu clip, but it's also a little bit pay to win, unless they've patched it by now.
Bro, I didn't even realize that. Mid-arena match, you can just buy things and pick it up from the mailbox. Yeah! Alright, now let's get out of here, man. Do I have bandages or something? Bandage. I'm out of bandages. Crap. Oh, you know what I could do? Just buy a quick bandage. Bandage. Buy it. Check the mailbox. One sec, let me TV sheep this. Got the bandage, cool. Let me bandage myself. There it is, that's a linen bandage. We'll Trinket of Fear. Skidoo. Greatest WoW clip of all time.
But store mounts are also in classic servers now. Maybe not that specific one, but regardless, it's now flashier and not the same classic or vanilla that you would have had years ago. Yet despite this, a huge chunk of the WoW community clings to classic. I believe that less is more. It's kind of like how nowadays little kids' development is actually affected by flashy, overstimulating cartoons and iPads that, instead of entertaining children, turn them into borderline drug addicts. I grew up with cartoons where the narration was slow and calming, the colors weren't overwhelming, and you actually had to listen and pay attention to what's going on in order to stay with the story, as opposed to everything being over-explained and spoon-fed to you, to the point that using your own brain isn't necessary. Why would it develop? It's great exactly where it's at. Classic WoW is like an old cartoon. Everything is rather simple, and you might think that the locations and the way that they're designed is cliche and tropey. Elves in enchanted forests, the seat of evil being located in a scorched fiery land, but what's wrong with that? There's a kind of beauty in keeping things simple that I think nowadays is really underappreciated. It could be because the technological capabilities have changed, and there's definitely more of a focus on making something super visually striking and stunning, pushing your system to its max capacity. But sometimes I think that overthinking it actually takes away more than it gives. Now, I don't play current WoW, I dropped it in Legion, but I have seen what the world looks like now, and not that it's not beautiful. I mean, it's clearly detailed and it looks lovely in some places, but I personally find it to be too much. Instead of feeling like it's inviting me to explore it, I actually feel overwhelmed and like maybe I would prefer to avoid it. For a lot of people, that's also coupled with how quests and progression is framed in modern WoW, that you're this big hero going to save the universe and everything is leading up to it. You don't really have time for exploration, and this was touched on in the I miss when WoW was just a game video. In classic WoW, you're just a little human, or a little orc, exploring in a big world, going into little buildings and structures that fit perfectly with whatever place you're in. There's nothing unexpected about it, really. It's maybe even rather cliche, but it fits together so nicely that you can't help but find it to be charming and cozy. In classic WoW, there were 8 playable races. Each race came with a very specific zone, buildings, and assets pertaining to it. All of those things were very typical, or exactly what you would imagine would fit that specific race. It wasn't trying to be anything else. The Night Elves were all tree huggers that live in trees and collect flowers. The undead were living in a rotting version of their once great Lordaeron, surrounded by graveyards and even deader undead. Dwarves have their sturdy structures built into the mountains with their beer and their kegs, and humans have the most typically medieval fantasy type setting imaginable, with cozy little houses and critters running around. Everything makes sense just the way it is, and it still retains so much character and personality. It's all very easily recognizable, very pleasant to look at. And these are just the starting zones. I know in current WoW, if you want, you can actually choose an alternative starting zone called Exile's Reach, which makes sense. People would have gone through the default starting zone so many times at this stage that I can understand the need or the want to mix it up a little bit. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. But when I look at Exile's Reach, it really reminds me of the starting zone from New World. Does anybody remember that game? So I actually played New World during its first week of launch, and if I'm honest, I just felt really detached from everything that was happening. The starting zone is sort of stressful, it's all a wreck. I don't know if they've changed it by now, but it wasn't for me personally a really good introduction to a new world. Get it? I don't know what it is, but I just feel like simple, cozy looking, and even somewhat cliche starting zones are so much more effective at getting you hooked on a particular game, especially when it's an MMO or any other kind of RPG. That and New World's soundtrack was really unremarkable. And this is another thing that you cannot take away from Classic no matter how much time has passed. The soundtrack was immaculate. Every starting zone had a super relaxing soundtrack, a very calm and slow vibe. There's no heroic, overwhelming music to make you feel like you have to rush or go fast. You're just in the world, you're just chilling. Darker and more adrenaline-rushing soundtracks were introduced later on in the game when you're actually meant to sweat a little. I listened to the Exile's Reach soundtrack, and not that it's bad, it doesn't sound bad. There's parts of it that are really beautiful, it's nice music. But again, personally, I feel that in a lot of parts, it's just too epic for its own good. For the start of the game, I mean. There is also the roleplay aspect, and I think this is actually often left out of these conversations. Now, I'm not a huge roleplayer myself, to be completely honest, but I recently watched a documentary on Netflix called The Remarkable Life of Ibelin. In it, you're told the story of a World of Warcraft player from Norway who suffered from a degenerative muscle disease that greatly limited his capabilities to do any activities outside of gaming. He was a role player who was part of a guild and actually had a big impact on the lives of the people that knew him in-game. By the way, I really recommend watching that documentary. It's a great reminder to be more mindful of how you treat others in online games, because you never know who you could be playing with. But back to the main point. This guy referred to World of Warcraft as his sanctuary. It wasn't just that he could create a character who could really be anybody in the roleplay sense, but it was also that the world felt like something accessible which could be explored and used as a part of your character's story. I think that this really calls for the world to be somewhat grounded in reality. Now, when I say this, I mean it needs to be realistic within the parameters of a fantasy world. Yes, there's magic and there's murlocs, and we might not have that in real life, but everything that is there feels realistic to its setting, and that way role players can easily immerse themselves in such a world. It was shown in the documentary that most of the roleplay took place between Stormwind and Elven Forest, and as someone who played on Argent Dawn EU, that's the equivalent of Moonguard US, I have found it to be true that those that did roleplay stuck to 3 or 4 main locations for their activities. Those were Elven Forest, Stormwind, Red Ridge, and Duskwood. Again, at the time we had new expansions coming, Draenor, Legion, but no matter what sort of new locations were introduced, people stuck to those 3 or 4 zones and rarely went beyond that. I even remember Horde venturing into those zones just to be able to roleplay there. It is in part due to things like accessibility, especially for lower level roleplay characters, but I also think it is due to the simplicity of those places and how the people that did roleplay felt that they could best immerse themselves in this world. The sanctuary. I think that this whole conversation is also a big indicator as to why the private server Turtle WoW has the popularity that it does. Now, being a private server, of course, the fact that people aren't paying for subscriptions to play on it is obviously a major contributing factor, but there are many such servers out there, and yet Turtle WoW stands out. And I think that this is because it approaches the game from the perspective of appreciating the simplicity that we had in Classic and expanding on it. Classic Plus. Turtle WoW, I also feel, has been a really good source of free market research for Blizzard, and we have seen them adopting several ideas that worked well on that server, such as Hardcore and even Season of Discovery, which was like an attempt at a Classic Plus. But overall, and while I know this is probably not the case for everybody, a huge chunk of the WoW community that has been around since the early days is more drawn to that classic, really grounded look that World of Warcraft had back in the day, and even though the community is actually totally different now and people don't experience the game the same way, we all fall into returning to Classic when a fresh server drops just because we want to be there. Let's not forget that the original look came from Warcraft 3, and seeing that expanded on and improved in World of Warcraft when it came out in 2004 was also a big deal and super exciting, especially because of the way they did it. Everything is just so nice looking, not overly complicated, easy to explore. Whenever I introduced new people to World of Warcraft, like even nowadays, they don't have any nostalgia over the look of anything in the game because they haven't played it before, but they seem to enjoy it for the same reasons that I do anyway. And that's why I think Classic Azeroth feels like home. And that about covers it for this video. I just really wanted to talk about World of Warcraft this week because I don't know, every now and again I get like really nostalgic about it, and I know that maybe coming back isn't the best idea because, well, what am I really gonna do? I don't really have anyone that I know who's playing right now, so what's the point? You're kind of by yourself. But there is always that bit of nostalgia. Well, maybe I'll just level by myself to like level 20. I still enjoy experiencing the world. It's so nice to be there, and that's kind of like what I feel expressed in this video. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. And thanks everyone again for your continued support on this channel. And I'll see you guys next week. Be seeing you. Bye!